May the words of my mouth, the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God. Amen. Today we are continuing in our sermon series on the I am statements found in John. In the past few weeks, we've seen the people throughout the passages struggle to comprehend that Jesus is the answer right now. Not a miracle waiting to happen, not a past story, but the Word made flesh, God's true Spirit answer in this very moment. Jesus is the light of the world, the resurrection and the life, the good shepherd, the gate, the way, the truth, the life, and as we'll hear in the next couple of weeks, the true vine and the bread of life. Jesus said to his followers, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Today, as you heard in our scripture, we will be focusing on Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life today. This is a very well-known text, right? But the two times that I see it most used are at funerals and when someone is trying to argue that Christianity is the most superior religion. But I want us to step away from those discourses today and take a look at this passage in context. So let's set the scene. Jesus is speaking with his disciples. He just informed them that he is going away, and where he is going, they cannot follow. This shocks the disciples, and they're all starting to ask questions. So this is part of that discussion. Many times in the Gospels, Jesus warns his disciples of his upcoming death. This time, Jesus knows that it's soon, and he reassures his friends and followers that even though he's leaving, he is preparing a place for them, and they will see him again. Thomas asked, but how can we know the way? And Jesus says to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He is reiterating what he's been saying all along, but his disciples still don't fully comprehend that Jesus is in the Father and the Father is in Jesus, that his words are God's words. He is the Word made flesh. Jamie Clark Souls explains this passage well when she talks about how other men in the Bible give away their earthly possessions on their deathbed. But since Jesus doesn't have any earthly possessions to give away, he gives his disciples peace and the power to do even greater works than Jesus himself did on his earthly sojourn. She goes on to point out that peace is what their troubled hearts need. And their hearts are troubled because they still have not learned to trust. Believe or trust language occurs 98 times in John, always as a verb, never as a noun. Jesus is challenging and comforting his followers with trust. Why 98 times? Because just like we can't seem to get the hang of it now, neither could the disciples who had the flesh and blood Jesus with them. How often do we wish that we could just meet Jesus and ask him all of our questions? And if we could just do that, we could trust and believe in him fully. Does anyone else feel that way? Well, the disciples had that, and it still wasn't good enough. The disciples walked with Jesus most every day, and they still had trouble trusting. And now they learn that Jesus in his human form is going to leave them. They're scared. They don't know what to do without their teacher and their guide. It's interesting that Jesus would say that there is one house with many rooms or dwelling places or mansions, whatever translation you're reading. This comes up repeatedly in John, this one home, oika or oikos. And this isn't the first time we've seen it. We've seen it in 6 other verses in the Gospel of John. My good friends from seminary and I sometimes talk about how great it would be if we could all live together like we did in the dorms, but with our families and more space, right? Like if we all bought houses in the same neighborhood. Because right now we all live in different states. We're all serving churches in different states. But we dream of that close proximity with one another. It's that closeness that we crave. And I never connected it to this passage until now. To be able to live so close to your loved ones, whether it's the family you're born into or the ones you choose later in life, it can be a comfort to be near the ones that you love. We were only an hour or so away when I was serving my second church in Delaware County, but I felt so anxious moving there, only an hour away. But I wouldn't have that easy access to our family anymore, that they would no longer live 10, 15, 20 minutes away. And I felt so anxious about that. In a similar way, these disciples are having anxiety at the thought of Jesus not being in close physical proximity to them anymore, of him going away and being far away from them where they can't get to him. But Jesus promises this great dwelling place. And this is not a far-off future event. It's not located in the clouds behind the pearly gate, even though we often preach it that way at funerals. Jesus makes this grand promise, and Thomas says, but we don't know the way. And Jesus assures him, you do. If you know me, then you know the way, because I'm the way. If we know Jesus, we know the way to this dwelling place. Souls argues that church might perhaps be that place. So many people in my 12 years of ministry have told me about the heyday of the churches that they were raised in. And while I felt that church was a second home for me growing up, being a secretary's kid, church truly was a second home for so many people in past generations. I heard stories about how everyone went to church. It was strange if somebody didn't go to church, which is the opposite now. When I meet someone and I'm like, you go to church? Wow, that's awesome. It used to be the opposite from what I hear from you all. But communities and families revolved around it, right? Church was the go-to place. People were there multiple times a week, most of the day on Sunday. Churches were packed with people of every age. It's not like the church now, where in many cases there are part-time pastors begging for volunteers to staff empty committees and unused buildings that are falling down, where people are only there 1 hour a week. And I know this description does not quite fit Lehman. Yay, Lehman. But it fits a lot of our local churches. Decades ago, people didn't actually live at church in the showering there, sleeping there sense of the word, but some people would describe their frequency as living there or dwelling there, a place where all were gathered to Jesus. And while many churches, and certainly our society, no longer fits this description, many churches still are like family and are a place where people are gathered to Jesus, even those ones that are only used a few hours a week, because the heart of Jesus is there. And we come together to praise and worship and learn about and serve this God who has gathered us together. But sometimes we lose sight of that and we forget to trust. Many of the scholars I have read for this passage sum it up in 2 words: trust me. Jesus is speaking to his friends, his followers, his disciples, telling them that he will be leaving soon, but he is saying, trust me. It's going to be okay. Is it any wonder, though, that we have trouble trusting? Look at the world in which we live. It wasn't any easier for the disciples. Their government was corrupt. Their culture had its problems. People were after them for following Jesus. They had trust issues too. They needed to know that everything was going to be okay. They left everything behind and risked their lives to follow Jesus, and now he's leaving them? Is it any wonder they have trust issues? And for us today, it's hard to trust. We've never met this flesh and blood Jesus. We know Jesus from stories on a page, from a feeling that we get, relationships with people. But when the evilness of the world we are in overpowers that feeling, when the problems of our world make us forget to read those pages, when the relationships we have with people turn ugly, it's harder to use those trust muscles. But we have to return to Jesus, return to the way, the truth, the life. Lutheran Bishop Craig Satterlee wrote, Jesus' reference to my Father's house is to more than a heavenly residence after we die. Jesus is speaking to our relationship of indwelling between God and Jesus. Jesus assures us that his return to the Father makes it possible for us to be included and participate in the relationship that he and his Father share. He goes on to say that Jesus does not want our hearts to be troubled. We've seen in the scriptures when Jesus' heart was troubled, disturbed, and angered, right? When faced with the power of evil and death. But Jesus is not telling us not to grieve our losses, but instead, do not lose heart. Trust in him. Don't let evil have the last word. Trust that God is working in every situation. This morning I was reading over my sermon and a song came to mind. And I wish it would have came to my mind last week because I would have had the professionals sing it for me. But it's called Trust by Sixpence None the Richer. And I've been debating all morning if I'm going to just read it to you or sing the verse. Maybe I'll start singing it and see how my voice sounds this morning. But it goes like this. Lord, sometimes it gets so tough to keep my eyes on you when things are going rough. But then I turn my eyes up to the sky and I hear your voice. It says to me, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Don't worry about tomorrow. He's got it under control. Just trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and he will carry you through. Which, of course, is inspired by Proverbs. But John Wesley, in his notes on the Bible, wrote, to the question concerning the way, he answers, I am the way. To the question concerning knowledge, he answers, I am the truth. To the question whither, I am the life. Furthermore, we cannot read this text as an exclusionary text. We come away from this text knowing more about Jesus and the experience of God as the Father. But again, Satterlee writes, so we come to the Father through Jesus and make Jesus known to all who will hear of him. We proclaim Jesus to any and all who will listen as the way to God, in that he is the way we know and trust, even as we trust the God made known in Jesus to handle the future of all who have not heard, will not hear, or who have heard and embraced another way to God. As Richard Boyce says, this is a family conversation, a word of comfort and challenge for those who are already following. These are comforting words, but they are also challenging words. Words that challenge us to trust. And isn't trusting one of the hardest things to do? But we believe in a mighty God, bigger than all of our problems.